Call this meeting to order. Welcome to the October 15th Special Instructional Committee meeting. We're going to start tonight with our school improvement plans, and we'll start with Mrs. Bucheri, the PK through 5 humanities plan. If when you come up, if you could just introduce yourselves for TV Land. Thank you.
I'm short. I have to make it a little lower. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Angela Bucheri. I'm the Pre-K 5 Humanities Coordinator, and I'm going to be sharing my department plan with you this evening. Mrs. Latore, oh, thank you. So I started with a quote, and this is something that I've shared with the staff a few times. Many of you know, because you were the ones that interviewed me, that this is a brand new role for me, and having these different departments within the humanities department, everyone's kind of in a little bit of a different place. We have some groups that are just starting to write their curriculum. We have some groups who are implementing a curriculum that they just wrote last year. And then we have other groups who have been using the same curriculum for a few years and we're getting ready to really delve into some new ideas and talking about what changes we need to make next. So this has kind of been a little bit of a mantra as we're talking about curriculum. It's just that we need to do the best we can until you know better, but then when you know better, you have to do better. So there are some changes that are coming based on new research, based on new resources, based on things that we know now that maybe we didn't know 5 years ago, 6 years ago when some of these curriculums were put into place. So that's kind of been a mantra for us as we're looking at some different things. So the next few slides are really just the bullet points of what's in your summary. So I know it doesn't look the same as what's in front of you, but because the summary is written as a narrative, I just wanted to kind of highlight a few things and talk about those a little bit. So in terms of language arts, we've been putting a lot of time and energy into improving instruction in the areas of phonological awareness and phonics. So those are two big components when we talk about foundational reading skills. So we're really working to provide more resources to build teacher capacity and comfort in those areas so that in turn we can increase student achievement in those areas. So one of the things that we've been doing to do that is this year we're universally using the PASS, which is a phonological awareness skill test in kindergarten. So though this test has been used in the district in the past, it was really used more of a diagnostic assessment. Most of the intervention students were given it. Sometimes teachers would turn to it if they had questions and they wanted to know more about a student. But this is really the first time that we're doing it systematically and with every single kindergarten student in the district. So that is something new that we're working on, and then using that information to really drive the instructional decisions that we're making in our kindergarten classroom specifically. We have a partnership with Literacy How. So right now that cohort is focusing on our K2 group. It is our K2 intervention team, it is our K2 special ed teachers, and then we have a kindergarten, first grade, and second grade representative from each building. So that group is meeting for 5 full-day sessions that are really jam-packed full of lots of information, some demonstration lessons. The presenter is one of the most dynamic presenters I've ever worked with. The group has they love her and have had nothing but good things to say about her. But those 5 days are just one piece of the puzzle. Literacy How is then, out of those 30 people that are here for those 5 full-day sessions, 12 of them are getting some pretty intense coaching in their classroom. So really taking what's being learned in those sessions and coaching them to make sure it's carrying over into practice. The phonics scope and sequence is new to 4th and 5th grade this year. That is something that we've been slowly rolling out. It started K3. This year, 4 and 5 has theirs, and all grades K through 5, have received some new phonics resources from Wiley Blevins, who's one of the leaders in the area of phonics right now. So K3 teachers received one resource, and then 3-5 teachers received another resource, and those have been unpacked at the September 19th PD and will be continued to be revisited through grade level meetings and other PD opportunities. So we joke that 3rd grade's the lucky winner because they're the grade that got both resources. And then the last thing I had wanted to touch upon for language arts was we have a Patterns of Power early adopter group. So Patterns of Power is written by a gentleman named Jeff Anderson, and it's really looking at a better way of teaching kids grammar, because grammar is one of those parts of language arts. It's not really necessarily the most fun. So it's really looking at a new approach to that, and we have 2 teachers from each grade, grades 1 through 5, that are, they spent a day with me last week really unpacking those materials and making some plans on what it's going to look like in their classroom, and actually some more materials just arrived for them today that I'll be delivering over the next few days. And really we're going to try and put those in place in their classrooms and see if it's something that we feel is a good fit for all of our teachers in grades 1 through 5. Yep.
Mr. Votto, and then Mrs. Purcell, sorry.
Going back to that last one, that is a program to teach grammar?
So it's not necessarily a program, it's more of a resource. I don't know if you're familiar with, if you've ever looked at the way Jen Saravallo wrote, there's a book that's the reading strategies, and there's a writing strategies book where it's really, instead of being a program that's every week, every day, you follow a certain program, it breaks down the different areas. So if, let's say students are having a hard time writing complete sentences, there's a section on sentences, and it will talk about, it'll give a couple of different mini lessons if that's something that your children are struggling with. If they're struggling with capitalization, there might be a mini lesson for making sure that we start sentences with uppercase letters and that we capitalize the pronoun I. So it's not something that teachers are going to be necessarily that every third grade teacher is doing the same lesson on the same day. It really allows them a little bit of flexibility. And as they're looking at their students' writing, this is something kids are really struggling with and they need right now. And then you would go to that resource and use it right now. So that's how the resource is designed. Again, we just unpacked it with these 10 teachers last week. So what they're going to like, how it's going to fit in with our curriculum, how, you know, those pieces I can't answer yet because they haven't really put it into play. But it really is designed to be flexible in that it's not something that has to be every lesson in the order as the author wrote it.
So it's a resource that a teacher can go to supplement something they're teaching in their class. If I'm teaching capitalization,
Yep.
there's extra things there that I can gather to use in my classroom. And every teacher's going to have this, what is that, kit? Or
So it's, and actually I have one in my office I can maybe grab for you after if you wanted to take a peek. So there's one book that was written that really spans the grades 1 through 5, and those actually just arrived for teachers today for the early adopters that they'll get. And what we unpacked last week is because the resource was receiving such rave reviews and people were loving it so much that the author actually created a different resource that's made for each grade, so that there are some things that are specific just for grade 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So those we looked at last week. And the teachers really, after looking at them, decided that those were not enough, that they were more an extension of the first resource, that they were not a replacement for it. So I purchased this other piece that just arrived for them today, and we're going to start looking at and see how it works for them.
Mrs. Purcell?
Yeah, I was looking at the past results that they did for kindergarten. One of the principals actually gave us like the 8 or 9 different things, and I loved the way it told you exactly, you know, how many people did rhyme recognition or how many people did syllable deletion and segmentation, and so it really steers you to what kids need. Do any of our other tests do that kind of thing with that kind of specific mastery?
So there are some reports in STAR that look at mastery, but they're a little bit broader. They're not as specific as, you know, you could look at like a domain and see, and it'll break down. We were just looking at the one, there's one in kindergarten about the foundational, you know, skill of decoding. But again, there's so many pieces that go into that, and because it's computerized, I really feel like this particular assessment, because you're giving it, you know, one-on-one, and the child's responding orally, to get that kind of information is really hard to get anywhere else.
Too bad.
No, because it's really
too
helpful, and
bad.
it's going to be very interesting. This is the first time doing it universally, so when I put those results in there, but I'm not really sure, you know, what we should expect to see in the spring, because it's the first time we've collected it for everybody, and again, because
Right.
we're doing so many things to address it this year that we haven't done.
Does PAST have something that goes beyond kindergarten? I mean, because you're doing
So-
phonics in every year, so is there something?
So the PAST actually starts in, there's 2 skills, I believe, that are pre-K, and then there's 4 that it assesses for first grade, and 2 that it assesses for second, I believe. So we are talking as an intervention department, like I really want them to have a little bit of ownership in this, and see when we get to the end of the year, is it something that we're going to continue for those skills in first grade? Is it something that we're going to, when we look at the first and second grade skills, have it just continue for those students who are in intervention? I really need to hear from them how it's going, the information, how valuable it was in driving their instruction. I have an idea based on the feedback that I've received from them so far, but again, being brand new and that this is the first time we're doing it, I want to make sure that I give them an opportunity as the experts and the ones that are doing it with the students to have a little bit of say about next year.
Ms. Castelli, and then Ms. Raccio.
So just to make sure I'm understanding this correctly, an early adopter that's a group of teachers that are trying this stuff out. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So my general question, and this might be to Carrie more than you specifically, but when we purchase tools like this Patterns of Power, and the early adopters try it out and they decide, this ain't working, is there a trial period offered? Are we stuck with this stuff? Can we get money back, in other words, if we decide this is not working for us?
So it sometimes depends on the materials. Last year we had several early adopters or social studies materials that came into the district. And those were, after using them and aligning them to the written curriculum, the staff decided that it wasn't as aligned as they would have liked, and they were all sent back. Things with language arts, we do a lot of research going into them. When we're purchasing a small amount, there are times that you're not able to send back. So we have to do a lot of due diligence up front before we determine that we're going to spend the money to purchase. We're very wise with how we spend the district's money to ensure that if we are putting out finances for a particular set of materials, if we're not able to return, that we are certain in their quality and how they align to our curriculum and how they're going to address our students' needs.
Okay. And then one other question. With respect to the Literacy How cohort, you said it's 5 full days.
Yes.
Is that PD throughout the year? So will these teachers those will be their 5 PD days?
No.
No.
So, throughout the school year, we'll often run PD outside of the 5 days that are district days. Something like this, where it's such a large group, and we wanted to ensure that they had all of the information from the sessions as early into the school year as we could, so that they could utilize that information in teaching our students. Well, those 5 days, we've already had 2. There's another one on November 1st. We'll be wrapped up with the 5 instructional sessions for structured literacy by the time we go on holiday break in December. And then the coaching that is a part of this cohort will last throughout the school year.
Okay, so I would assume then we have subs coming in
Yes,
to
we
cover
do.
those classes for those days. Okay, thanks.
Mrs. Raccio?
As far as the past, what type of training did we give the teachers who are administering it so we can make sure it's done with fidelity?
So many of the teachers got trained in it when they did ReadCon. So this year, because all of the interventionist teams have had people at ReadCon, so we had the interventionists doing it with the classroom teachers, so that the classroom teachers weren't doing it on their own, because it is something that's new.
That was my question. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions?
All right, so SRBI and intervention. So the SRBI management team last year did a ton of work really looking at what we have in place for SRBI, looking at what other districts had put together in terms of handbooks, really talking about what was going well, areas that they would like to improve. And we created, and it was shared out this year, our first SRBI handbook. So a lot of the things that were included in the SRBI handbook before were the first few pages of our intervention guidelines, but lots of times, because those are intervention guidelines, the only people that were reading it were the interventionists and not the entire staff. So we felt by really pulling the two things apart and giving a little bit more attention, that it really gave the information to our Tier 1 classroom teachers and all of the staff, rather than having it being something that was really just focused on by intervention. We are also working to get frontline RTI, which is a way of keeping all of the information for SRBI electronically, rather than in the past we've been doing it in different manners, which sometimes makes it hard when students are moving from one school to the other. So hopefully this will make it a little bit more efficient and consistent as children move through the schools. The intervention guidelines were updated with input from the interventionist, Christy Medancy, Carrie Ludadio, and I worked on those together. The WIN block, this kind of goes back to the past. We're really looking at, in kindergarten especially, they get so much extra attention this year, really tightening up that WIN block and looking at, so now we have all this information from the past, so what are we doing with it? So if we know in a particular classroom that there's particular strengths and particular weaknesses, how are we building off of those strengths? How are we helping improve those areas in which students have weaknesses? How are we utilizing the classroom teacher, the paraprofessional that's in that room? And in the fall, intervention services in kindergarten are not formal services, so the interventionists are going in. So then we have, during that WIN block, we have 3 adults in there. So really looking at, here's the information, here's what students need, grouping kids based on those needs and making sure that we're building off their strengths and getting those skills in place that they need to be strong readers. And the last thing for SRBI and intervention is our interventionists. It was Christmas in September. They were given some materials to support their work. So LLI it was K2 last year. The 3-5 interventionists received their LLI kits this year, and then we were also able to get them some Wilson materials, which so that they all have the same materials when they're delivering instruction in the area of decoding.
Ms. Levesque?
Yes, thank you. Let's talk about students that are in Tier 2 and Tier 3 services. How long do they typically stay in there? Because my concern is that we're making sure that we're monitoring very closely so that if they're not being successful and they need to move to a different tier or even be identified, that process be done in a timely fashion so that they're not just kind of languishing in some place.
Right, so typically one cycle lasts about 6 or 8 weeks. So again, to really know if a strategy is effective, we need to give it a little bit of time. So typically, if a classroom teacher has a concern about a student, we would first say to that classroom teacher, well, if there's this concern, what are some Tier 1 strategies that are in place? So basically, we're asking the teacher, what are you doing for this student that maybe the other students in your classroom, don't need, and we'll talk about what's successful and what's maybe not working. And if that's not enough, then the child goes into Tier 2. A goal will be set, and we'll pick a strategy that's research-based to really try and help the student meet that goal, and we'll track that closely for 6 to 8 weeks. At the end of that 6 to 8 weeks, what really happens depends on the student and depends on the team. Sometimes the student will meet a goal and the team will say, well, let's set this next goal because there's this one other thing that we want to make sure that we help the student with. Other times it'll be like, oh, well, that was the one thing that the child needed, and now it seems that they're on their way, we were able to fill that gap, and now services are no longer needed. And then there are other times when, in spite of a few rounds of Tier 2 services, if we're not seeing the kind of progress we'd hope for, the team might at that point change the services from Tier 2 to Tier 3. But really, I don't think that there's never one answer, because every case is really different depending on the student and the need.
That's true, but I just want to make sure that, because there have been occasions where sometimes students don't make the progress that we'd like to see, and they seem to kind of be caught up in the process rather than being moved on to something else. So those are the students that I'm concerned about, that can go possibly through an entire year without really making the progress that we'd hope to see. So I just want to make sure that there are safeguards in place so that that's not occurring with students, that we are, when they're not successful with a strategy or two, that, what are we doing to make sure that we've identified all of their issues that they're having, and how are we supporting that student through that?
Right, so and again, the safeguards are in place, and hopefully, we are trying really hard, again, to make sure that we're doing more things in Tier 1. So hopefully we have less students that require that service. And again, some of the things that we put in place in the SRBI handbook and the protocols that we're trying to this year are really trying to make things a little bit more consistent, and hopefully the cases you mentioned are something that we don't have to talk about in the future occurring.
There's also a decent amount of conversation at our level meetings that talk about the SRBI process between buildings, so that if there are cases that come up, the building principals have an opportunity to kind of talk with one another and collaborate. It is something that is really gray, to be honest. When you look at a child who's experiencing some learning difficulty, whether it's in literacy or numeracy or even behaviorally, and how long to keep them at tier 1 or tier 2 or tier 3. There isn't a set, answer. You look at the rate of response to the intervention. Part of the work that's been done over the last several years with the intervention guidelines and the SRBI handbook is, one, to make sure that we're providing all of the buildings with a consistent set of resources that everyone has access to. That we speak to the tier 1 interventions and what those look like. The fidelity piece, that if a child's experiencing difficulty, that they're met with in small group every day. And so some of those things are put in place while also providing, professional development in the fact that, if you truly feel, or your SRBI team feels that there is a learning disability, that you can go to PPT to look at that while still providing intervention while you're going through that PPT process. And sometimes there's misconceptions at each building, and so as questions come up, as you have conversations, you're talking about process and making sure that everyone understands the steps of what they should do, what they can do in order to best meet that child's needs.
And you mentioned the SRBI handbook. Is that available for board members to look at?
It's linked into your agenda in this plan as well. If you would like a separate copy, I'll email that out.
That'd be great, thanks.
Yeah, I did link it in because I knew you asked about it last week, but I
Yes.
didn't realize you guys got paper copies.
Yes.
Ms. Castelli?
Can you talk a little bit about how we can distinguish a kid who's not ready to read yet? Because I know developmentally, some kids just aren't ready to read, versus the kid that really is struggling and maybe has a learning disability. Are we able to distinguish between those two, and do we treat them differently?
So it depends. If we're talking about a student who English isn't their first language, sometimes it's really hard to tease out, is it language or is it reading? Because sometimes that makes it, again, a little, using the expression Mrs. Latour used, it makes it a little bit more gray, because then it's a little bit harder to determine. So, that's an area where we do realize when some students come in, just based on just observing how they handle books and their comfort with books. Sometimes it's very clear that a student maybe just, isn't ready or hasn't had that exposure, and maybe they need to hear a few more stories and be a little bit more engaged with books. But there is a difference, and again, with our EL students, sometimes when we're able to tell the difference, sometimes we will opt to provide more language services rather than reading services as we're trying to tease out the two, if we really feel that it's more something that relates to language rather than it relates to reading.
Can I just interrupt for 1 second? With our EL bilingual department over the last 2 years, we've had a consultant work with that group of teachers as well. And they have gone through the process of language acquisition versus reading difficulty. And so after each universal screen, and we kind of talked about that a little bit last week, where the buildings will sit down and look at the results of their screening. Part of that work is sitting with the intervention team as well as the EL bilingual teacher to talk about a student's readiness for intervention services, or are they at a level in which they still need the language piece. And those conversations are very important to determine which path that student should be on. And over the years, that knowledge base that's growing with the intervention department, with the Yale bilingual department, to properly put the student on the right path so that when they are ready for reading services versus just the language piece, they have a strong foundation to receive that reading intervention. Does that make sense?
Yep. Thank you.
And Kim Moore and I just went, I think last week, to a full day about SRBI and what that should look like for our students who English is not their first language. So making sure that we have those in place in our SRBI process as well.
Angela, I'm going to bump in a second too, okay? So on the other end, so we have the EL end, we also have that language delayed kid, or the kid that's just not ready to learn. I think that's specifically what you're asking about. We actually, so my background is in early childhood, in that early developmental reading. So some of the things that we're putting in place with our speech and language pathologists and our school psychologists, specifically at that pre-K2 level, is a screening that looks exactly at that piece. Is it just a delay a school readiness delay as opposed to there's some warning signs that we can identify very early in the kindergarten level of that there may be a reading disability there. So that is something that we're putting in place as well, just
Awesome.
to back that up a little bit. I think that's kind of what you're asking.
Yes,
correct?
absolutely, exactly, thank you.
Ms. Raccio and then Ms. Purcell.
That's actually a great segue to what my question was. So I was going to ask about, using the PASS test for all Tier 2 and Tier 3 to identify, because we use the STAR as one of the major points for cutoff to entry to Tier 2 and Tier 3, but that doesn't have a phonological component to it. So if we're putting students in Tier 2 or Tier 3, would the PASS test be beneficial to making sure that those students, regardless if it's past grade 2, have been identified whether or not they have a phoneme problem or advanced phoneme problem?
So I think there's actually a more in-depth evaluations and screenings that are actually, will get into it in a deeper level, something that we're looking at. I think the PASS is a great universal to identify those hot spots, but then there's something that we're going to put in place that kind of really looks at that Tier 2, Tier 3 student and really breaks down, like here you have, the PASS gives us those nice broad categories,
Mhm.
but with the screening that we're looking at, it actually delves deeper into deletion, submission, omission,
Perfect.
rhyming. So it's like that second level up. So
Okay.
we're kind of looking at piggybacking. We're going to use that as a universal, but then get some really more in-depth screenings that the speech and language pathologists, the school psychologists, and the interventionists and teachers can use to really kind of give us that, ooh, we really should look a little bit deeper in this.
Okay. And that's not with STAR, that's a different screening?
Yes,
Good.
it is.
Thank you.
Ms. Purcell.
Oh, Angela, you mentioned about how students handle books. You know, that's one of the ways you screen or you look at them. Are you talking about books that have no words, where they're just looking at stories and trying to read pictures and things like
Right, so it's interesting when you go into a kindergarten classroom, some kids, because the books very much have a pattern. So, I see the red flower, I see the pink flower, I see the yellow flower. And there's some kids that will just, flip through the pages and they talk about the pictures. There will, be other kids that are starting to point at words. And then, again, sometimes there will be kids that aren't even sure how to hold the book because
Okay.
maybe they've never had an opportunity to hold a book before. So then sometimes, right away, we start to, is that a lack of exposure, or is that a lack of, is that a lack of readiness? And sometimes you could just see
Okay.
some of the struggles that the kids are having before we even get into any of the instruction, just by seeing how they, if you were to put a pile of books in front of them, what they do with them.
Okay.
What is the district's position and philosophy on when we do identify a kindergartner? Because we do have kindergartners who start at 4 years old. When we do identify a kindergartner who is not developmentally ready to read, and maybe not developmentally ready to go on to first grade, what is our policy on holding students back, keeping them back in kindergarten or even in first grade?
So the K-2 principals, will work with their staff through SRBI and through intervention to monitor student growth, whether it's difficulty learning, behaviorally, social, emotionally, all of those things. Around January, they sit down, they meet with their grade level teams every week, and they'll start to talk about kids who may not be ready to move on. It is a conversation that happens between the teacher and the principal, the parent as well. Depending on other support personnel who works with that student, they'll be involved in that meeting and the decision making. So it could be an interventionist, it could be social worker, school psych, whomever on the school-based team is working with that child. Will create an action plan to look at the areas of need that need to be addressed. And they monitor that very closely over time, because you don't want to make a decision in haste. You don't want to make a last-minute decision. You want everybody on the team working together with full knowledge of what the goals are and how the child's progressing through those goals. And from there, dependent on that student's progress over time, a decision will be made prior to the end of the year. But they are working for many months on where the issue is, where they want the growth to be, and how that child is progressing towards that growth. And every year there are students who are retained for a variety of different reasons. And it's the team that's comprised of everyone who works with that child and the home as well, who will help make that decision.
Thank you.
Because it's not an easy decision.
Okay, all right, so social studies, fine arts, and library. Social studies has a new curriculum that was just adopted last year, so the teachers are implementing it for the first time this year. So my plan with that is as each marking period comes to an end, just to collect some feedback from the teachers and, if necessary, make any revisions or tweaks so that it's successful in their classrooms. To support them with that, each classroom K-5 was purchased a classroom library. When I say library, I mean just a couple of bins, not a whole library, of books that support the units. So that way, again, if they're reading about helpers in their community or a particular state or region of the country, that they have books in their classroom, that they're not all running down to the library to fight over the same books. So that was put in place to support that. Connecting to the librarians have worked really hard at the 3-5 level to make this great research model that they're working with their K2 colleagues to kind of vertically align and have those kids as developmentally appropriate start some of that research. And so it transitions nicely when they leave the K2 schools and go to the 3-5 buildings. And part of that, at the K2 buildings, we've purchased Pebble Go, which is an online database. And for the 3-5 buildings, they have something called Pebble Go Next, and then the World Book Encyclopedia online, so that, again, they can work on those research skills. What's nice about the Pebble Go and the Pebble Go Next is it reads to students as well. So for those students who want to explore certain topics but maybe are having a harder time reading that material on their own, it does that for them. And then in terms of art and music, they're in a little bit of a different place of continuing to develop their curriculum. Most of the music curriculum has been improved. We're working on the last few grades in music. Instrumental music is working on creating some assessments that align to their indicators in their curriculum. And art spent the whole day with me today really delving into what's coming next, and we're really excited that we have someone coming in to work with them on the election day PD to really get them started with their curriculum.
Mr. Votto, and then Ms. Levesque.
Okay.
I knew I was finding a social studies question from you, Mr. Votto. I was just waiting.
I don't have the curriculum in front of me. I might not see.
Yeah, we did it.
I'm looking for it today, anyhow, if, I understand the library books that they have in the classroom, but as you get older, like in 4th and 5th grade, do they have a textbook that they use?
So Ms. Latour kind of actually touched on that a little bit before, that there was a pilot of a textbook used last year. And again, because I'm taking over, my understanding was that the teachers really didn't find that it aligned and that it didn't give them what they needed in terms of supporting the curriculum. So they decided that they did not want to purchase and adopt the textbook.
The textbook itself, that particular textbook, it is not exactly easy to find a textbook for 4th and 5th grade that aligns completely. And the one that they piloted had certain sections that were lovely and that were enjoyable, but the majority of the book was not. And for the cost of the book, it was prohibitive. 3rd and 4th grade they're not large textbooks, but they are resources to teach major components of their units. But there have yet to be, to find a textbook that you might see in middle school or high school that completely aligns to 4th or 5th grade at this time.
Or are you still looking?
Yeah, we're always looking. And so far, the best resources right now is because so much of the elementary is we try to integrate as much as possible.
Yeah, I know.
So, and through that, yeah. And through that, the library sets that Mrs. Bukhari bought at the start of the school year aligned well to the different units of study and the different themes that are in the units of study throughout the grades. So this was a great start to expose students to the social studies content through the use of literature.
I'm getting a feeling that that's the way it's going to remain. I'm a firm believer that a child needs a textbook.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody can, I think it's difficult sometimes to gather information from the computer.
Right.
And I just think having that book in front of them is much easier. I also understand think that's a great idea, but I don't think it should be just that.
It's
No,
not.
I
it's
think
not.
there should be a separate time for social studies.
There
There's
is.
a separate time, K-5, they do have a separate time. The only places that we're looking to overlap a little bit, some of the books that we purchased are kind of lengthy, meatier books, so we thought if kids are really getting into historical fiction and learning about a certain era, like why not do that as a part of a book club during your ELA block, so that you could be unpacking the book. So part of the feedback that I'm going to be collecting from the 3-5 teachers is they're using these books for the first time, or what books did kids really devour and really love and were engaged in, and what books did the teachers find were really helpful in hitting home what they're trying to teach in terms of content. So as I'm budgeting for next year, if there are ones that would really lend themselves to be used in book clubs, so that they could be reading them alongside their teachers in that way, that maybe I could purchase additional copies of those particular titles. But again, like Mrs. Latour said, we keep looking for the textbook, and we just at this point haven't.
But I'm all for application, and I think that's a good idea, having the books in the classroom, you know, that apply or can be connected to the content. However, I really do believe you need at least in the 5th grade level, a book that they can use. I know there's not one book that's going to match the curriculum. That's not going to happen, but that's the teacher's job, to pick and choose from that book what does apply and what doesn't. They have to find the information on their own to match the curriculum. I'm concerned about that is because we put these kids in 6th grade in 70-minute periods where they have social studies for 70 minutes. And that's a big jump if they're not using a textbook at all in 5th grade. And there's not that set time each day or how many days a week to do social studies. I just think it's a big transition.
It is.
I think we need to, you talked about vertical articulation. That's what needs to be done in 5th grade and 6th grade and every subject area. But I think that will help our 5th grade teachers get these kids prepared for 6th grade. I don't think you can do that without textbook. That's mine.
There is a set time for social studies, at every grade level. So it's not that during the language arts block, they're doing social studies content. There is a dedicated time for social studies. It does alternate with science. Not every other day in some cases, they might do a science unit for a couple of weeks, and then they switch over to do their social studies unit for a couple of weeks. So I don't want you to think or walk away from this conversation to think that social studies is only done through the English language arts block, because that's not the case. Okay. So from there, they are, gathering resources to teach the content part. And, as Mrs. Bukhari said, we're always on the lookout for resources that align. The teachers are also always on the lookout for resources to align, and when they find things, they are more than happy to bring it to our attention to say, hey, did you see this? This looks great. And so, and that's part of the writers group that help write the curriculum, the management team that looks at the curriculum and approves the curriculum before it comes to the board. So just because the curriculum is in its first stage of implementation and they have their sets of materials, that doesn't mean that we don't add to them as time goes on.
Did we have materials for them before we actually let them use this new social studies curriculum? Were there things available for them to implement that?
They started implementing the curriculum last spring with part of those textbooks, and universally, their feedback back was there wasn't enough in the textbook to warrant the purchase of the textbook. So, that is why we chose not to move forward with the McGraw-Hill, series. Yes, they had resources as part of the curriculum, and we continue to add to those to make sure that, the teachers have what they need in order to implement.
And you will continue with that.
Absolutely.
Okay, Ms. Levesque?
Yes. Regarding music and art teachers and looking at the fine arts department, I know that in the 3-5 age, grade 3-5, usually there is a test that's given and identification of students that may be gifted and talented occurs. I guess I've been talking about this for quite some time, and we're obligated to identify those students that are gifted and talented, but not only academically, but also in the arts. And the question becomes, how does that identification take place? What tool can we use to identify those students?
So you want me to go there?
Yeah, that would be
I thought so. Okay, so our gifted and talented identification is one of the things that we're actually looking at this year. So we do a very good job of identifying, as you said, the academically. One of the resources that we'll use is we'll use UConn's resource for the talented. They have a great questionnaire that the art and music teachers will look at, and that will start at the same age as we do the gifted. So we'll look at that, and we'll go through the same process of identifying the screenings, getting the teacher recommendations, looking at portfolios and student work, both musically and artistically. So that's something we'll start using. Menzuli's research is very good in that area.
I appreciate that, because this has been an interest of mine for some time, because we are absolutely identifying those students that are academically gifted and talented, but for those students that might be talented in the visual or performing arts,
Correct.
and we still are required to identify them as well. This is great news.
Yeah, there are some holes in our identification process across the board, so we'll be looking at that throughout the year.
I appreciate that, thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Purcell?
Yes, Angela, you're talking about the classroom libraries for social studies. Is there like a copy for every child of a particular book? Or is
No,
it just
so-
one copy?
So what we have purchased for this year is the publisher who put them together for us went through and looked at our curriculum and made for each unit, for K2, for each unit that the teacher is teaching, they selected books that are for the teacher to read aloud to the students, and they selected books for the students to read aloud. So lots of times if you go into a K2 classroom, you'll see there'll be books either on the ledge of the whiteboard, or sometimes
Right.
they'll have those end displays. So again, if they're in this particular unit learning about the particular topic, those will be out for the students to read either with a partner or read to themselves when they're reading, and then there are books for the teachers to read aloud to
Okay, so mostly
use.
it's going to happen in a read aloud.
So-
So for every student to get whatever that topic is. And then
and
you
then
ma-
the 3-5 library is less read aloud
Okay,
because they're meatier books.
Right.
And there are more books for the kids to read, but again, we were trying to work on the budget that we had, so we are looking at if there are things that are really working to maybe purchase additional copies, so again, that kids could read them, together in book clubs and use them that way. And again, because we only had a set amount of money that we're trying to get some of these books, that's why we went with the Pebble Go and the Pebble Go Next and the World Book, because it gives a nice balance of both print text and online text. And again, the Pebble Go and the Pebble Go Next actually being able to read to the students is also helpful, so that every kid is able to access what it is that they're learning about in class.
all right. And I just want to ask you about the book club. The book club, is that going during the WIN time
No,
slot?
usually the reading groups and book clubs happen during the ELA block. So
Okay.
again, if we have the social studies block, that we're teaching the social studies, but again, to get, like Mr. Rado said, more time on that topic, if there are places where we could,
Okay, so
do
it
a
happens
little
during
bit of
ELA.
both.
Okay,
that would be ideal.
all right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so the next part of what I had shared with you, there's a lot of data in there, and the two big things I think when I look at my plan and action step is, why are we doing the past? Why is it important that, we start screening everybody? And just, the research on if we identify early in a student's life that they're having problems in these area or that the child is dyslexic, it takes 4 times longer to intervene if we identify that child in 4th grade versus if we intervene in kindergarten. So the reason of doing this now and making this change is, like we said before, when you know better, you do better. So now that we know this and we know better, we really need to do better and make sure that we're checking in on every student, not just those that may present as having a problem in kindergarten. So that's why we're doing the past and the phonological awareness, and really why we're taking a hard look at what we're doing in phonics. This is the early data for the past 4 years. And when you look at this, there is a pattern that we have too many students leaving the K2 schools, just not reading where we want them to read. So clearly, this indicates to me, as I take over this role, that we need to do some work in the area of phonics. So that was one of the pieces of data that really kind of drove the plan and the decisions that were made as we move forward. So again, you have the full plan, but just, highlighting a few of them. I think we've talked about the past quite a bit, that, we're going to be monitoring student progress in the area of phonological awareness and decoding more frequently in Tier 1. So again, we're catching those problems early. Really, in terms of professional development, we're doing a lot already this year with really getting more resources into teachers' hands, providing them time to really unpack those resources with their administrators and with their grade level partners. We have Literacy How coming in. We have Jill Goldberg coming in, who's done a ton of work for the state in the area of art. And our art teachers are so excited to have someone come in and help them with their curriculum work that's an expert in the area. And again, just really giving teachers the resources that they need so that they could carry out the curriculum that we've provided for them, with having all of the resources they need at their fingertips rather than having to search and look for them. And one other thing that I'm adding to my plan this year is really finding a few nights. I actually have a meeting with the Wellington Public Library, I believe next week, I know all of the schools do lots of family literacy nights and have families in, but really looking at 2 events, one really targeting our kids that are not ours yet. Maybe they're about to enter the public schools, or maybe they're some of our pre-K students, really just supporting parents and informing parents of what they could do as home as the first reading teacher to their child, and providing them some of that information so that they could be a better support, and then planning another event really focusing on that K2, K3 age, and kind of really helping parents understand, again, what they could be doing as their child's first teacher at home, because the schools do a great job having literacy nights that focus on activities and building the excitement around the love of reading. So these would really be more of a tool to really inform parents and support them.
All right. I just have another question.
Oh,
Sorry.
go ahead.
You're done, right?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to ask, I was looking at the SBA scores, you said grade 4 scores have been declining and are below the state average. Were the other scores are improving, the 3rd and the 5th? Is there anything specific we're doing to work on that?
So I did some digging to see if there were certain things that were a pattern. If there were certain either the reading targets or writing targets where we were kind of falling flat. And I think I went back like 4 years, and there really wasn't a pattern. There were 2 years that a reading target came up in 2 grades, and there were 2 years that a writing target came up in 2 grades. But what was ironic, it was 1 year in 3rd, and it was the following year in 4th. So I'm not really sure if it's that cohort is having a hard time with that
Okay.
one thing, or
Okay.
if that's a curricular area. And ironically, it was grammar and editing. So because we're doing the patterns of power, I feel like we're already maybe looking at a resource to kind of help in that area. But I couldn't find in the data when I went down to even the target level of digging in something that stood out as a curricular issue in grade 4 that we really need to address. And I know that we've been digging into it at the building level and trying to look into things, but at the district level I haven't found a clear target that kids are struggling with.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Raccio?
I just want to commend the district for the use of the past as the diagnostic tool. Legislative session last time passed a act to implement a task force, and the first meeting is going to be later this week. And one of the things that they're going to be looking at is whether or not, I know it's an unfunded mandate, but whether or not there should be a screening tool for the use of some type of universal screen to identify these types of issues earlier. So we are ahead of the curve in looking at structured literacy and having Literacy How here. Obviously, Alliance districts have had the benefit of additional funding for many years to do this, but there's many, many districts that do not have the resources and the attention that we're putting on this topic in Wallingford. So, thank you.
Mr. Votto?
Thank you.
I have a big mouth. I'm glad, Mrs. Latour, you gave your little talk about kindergarten, whether we keep children back and whatnot. And even with this screening we're doing as early as kindergarten, I always worry about the fact that we're too quick to label a child. And I really feel that in kindergarten, it's the first time the children are in a full-day classroom setting, and you have a lot of children that come from homes where they don't do reading at home. You have children who have emotional or just immaturity. And many times we can't base a child's progress academically sometime properly because of those issues. And that's why I'm always worried about labeling a child in kindergarten based on certain screenings and whatnot, because you don't have, it doesn't show you the whole picture. And I'm glad to hear you say there's a lot of people who are involved in that to discuss the child in all aspects of their growth.
So we also shifted to last year where, you know, we do have a lot of students coming in at 4 and some coming in at 5, some who have had preschool, some who have not. So in order to just give kids a chance to acclimate to the school environment and to the expectations of school, to being in school full day, you know, we held off on doing a fall screening for kindergarten last year. To let them get settled into the routines of school, to get some instruction under their belts. Intervention teachers push into the classroom. They take small groups with the paraeducator in the classroom and the kindergarten teacher, and it just gives kids a chance to kind of settle in. And they're broken up into small groups based on level of need. So you may have kids who are learning their letters versus kids who know their letters versus kids who are beginning to read. And then they get their first screening in December. And we saw really good results last year with that, as kids were able to settle in and not, you know, within the first 2 weeks of school, get screened. And, you know, as a result, a lot of the intervention numbers at the kindergarten level at the 4K2 buildings were down in December because kids did have the opportunity to get some instruction where they were at and grow from there. And it was a really good decision for each school.
I just get concerned sometime also that these screenings or they're just snapshots, you know, and we just can't rely so heavily on them. We have to take the whole child and look at the whole child and take all those things into consideration. Just to add my 2 cents.
Okay.
And Mike, this really surprised me, this statistic, when I read through Moses, I think it was, Moses by Beach. 36 of that school's population this year, the majority began their first formal public school experience. So that's a huge statistic to think that 36%, it's their first, to your point. And it just, if that's your very first, then you've got some kids that have been in a formal setting since they were maybe 3, 4, who knows, so. It's an important point.
I do have another question. I really don't want to hesitate holding kids back when they need to be held back. I don't want to push kids forward who are not ready. Does the state look at our data in terms of who starts in kindergarten and then who remains in the next cohort, who stays back? Do they look at it and do they count it against us?
No, they don't count it against us. We do have to report the number of retentions on a state report that we compile at the end of the year, and that's for all grades.
Yep.
What the state does with that, I don't know. But it's not held against us to retain
Because we used to
students.
have transitional. You remember transitional between first and kindergarten and first, and they're not ready. And it doesn't mean they're labeled. It just means they need extra time, the gift of time. And so I don't want to hesitate giving kids the gift of time if that's what they need. If they,
A lot of kids did go from transitional to 2nd grade. They didn't necessarily stay in 1st grade the next year.
I always think long-term, like I think of the 12-year-old 8th grader who starts 8th grade at 12 years old, and they can sometimes stick out like sore thumbs. And if we can avoid that, it helps all throughout, it helps every grade through. If we can avoid that. So I just don't want to hesitate. I don't want it to be, I don't want to hesitate keeping kids back who need to be kept back. And I understand that parents have to be on board also. I understand that. I want to make sure that we are able to offer that to students who need it.
Mhm.
All set, Mrs. Bukhari?
I'm all set.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Okay.
Next we have Stevens, Mrs. Kiley.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. I'm Christina Kiley. I'm the principal at Stevens. This is my 19th year as an educator in Wallingford. So I feel I have a unique lens in the sense that I've really seen students in the Wallingford community grow and evolve over the years as we've all seen kind of the needs change in time. This is my 4th year as the principal at EC Stevens. And what I wanted to do tonight is start by just giving you a little picture of kind of what's inside EC Stevens School. So when you walk through those doors, you see 330 students, and their ages range from age 3 to age 8. We have 80 staff members. At Stevens, English learners make up 10% of our population. We have 9 languages that are spoken there. We have full day and half day pre-K programs. So this year it was really exciting. We were able to add a full day class in addition to our half day class. We have 5 kindergartens, 5 first grades, and 5 grade 2 classes. At Stevens, we have a K2 STARS, which is an autism program, and we have 3 classrooms in the autism program. Stevens is bustling with very active committees. We have a very active core SRBI committee. Our technology committee is also an active group of staff who meet on a regular basis. That goes the same with our climate committee and our building-based professional development committee, as well as our safety and security committee. Also at Stevens, we host the family literacy program, which is through adult ed, and that takes place each Monday and Tuesday in our building. So hopefully that painted a little picture of what's inside Stevens School. I thought it was important to start with some celebrations. So a few things I wanted to celebrate tonight were, first, a decrease in the discipline incidents from 1718 to 1819. And those are the reported incidents, which involve suspensions from school on the bus, and that went from 24 down to 9. There was also a decrease in the office referrals during recess time from the 1718 year of 63 to the 1819 year of 33. And a little later in the presentation, I'll talk about one of the strategies in place to really help with that. Something else I think merits celebration is breakfast connections, which are something that started 2 years ago and averaged about 125 to 150 people, including parents, other family members, and students. And it's a way for students and their families to come into the building in the morning, starting at 8:15, and have casual conversation, light fare, which I usually get catered from food services. And they just get a chance to be part of the school community, get to know other families, their children's friends, and really just feel comfortable in the school environment. So we've held those throughout the year, and the attendance remains at about approximately 125 to 150 per event. So I'm proud of that. Something else that I wanted to celebrate are the grade level medians on STAR. So looking at a grade level and the average SGP, so that average student growth percentile rank for a grade level. And the average Connecticut student growth percentile rank is 40 to 60. So basically what that means is students should on average be demonstrating a growth within the range of 40 to 60. So last year on our STAR early literacy test, at the end of the year, the kindergarten SGP was 62 for the grade level, for that median score. And for grade 1, it was 67. Grade 2, it was 64. So it's great to see that those were above the state average of 40 to 60. In STAR reading, grade 1's average median SGP was 71, and grade 2's average SGP was 61. On STAR math, grade 1's median SGP was 55, and grade 2 had a median SGP of 42. So I did think those are worth pointing out and celebrating as part of the presentation. So having taken a minute to look at what Stevens has inside of its doors and some of those celebrations, I also want to be real about some of the changes that we need to put in place to move forward. And I want to jump to the quote at the bottom and then go back up to the data. So it says, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. So we're really looking to make change so that we can see improvements in those numbers. So in your packet, you have data from the 18-19 year as well as the data from this fall. But on this particular slide, I just wanted to look at ERLA and STAR for reading and math, and look at where students were at the beginning of the year and then where they were at the end in terms of those proficiency levels. So we can see for ERLA, at the beginning of last year, we had 25% of our kindergartners proficient. Actually, that was, beginning of the year. By the spring, we had 70% at proficiency or above. Grade 1 started with 34% and ended with 65% at proficiency or above. Grade 2, starting at 27, ended at 60. And with early literacy, we can see that kindergarten started with 60%, ended with 72 at proficiency. Grade 1 started with 60% at proficiency, ended with 71% at proficiency. Grade 2 starting at 62 and ending with 73. In math, similar, starting at 54 and ending in the 70s at 79%. Grade 2 started with 60% proficient and ended at 71%. So really, when I look at this, I think, what can we do to get those percentages up, to get out of the 70s and in some cases the 60s and get to 100%? So what are we going to do? So I wanted to talk to you a little bit tonight about some of the changes that we're putting in place this year to get those percentages up, because I think it's time to raise those percentages and get out of the 70s and really get as close to 100% as possible. So one thing that we're doing this year is we're focusing on those high impact teaching strategies, otherwise known as the HITS. So at each, actually to back up, in August, after we did a professional development with staff on those high impact teaching strategies, we did a reflection, a little survey to see which areas staff felt they wanted to continue to focus on or could use some more discussion, professional growth in. And so I was going to share those particular areas with you. And those were collaborative learning, the questioning and inquiry, scaffolding, and promoting student discourse. So those are the areas that the staff at Stevens identified as high impact teaching strategies that they wanted to focus more on professionally. So that's where our building-based professional development committee will come in and will help to support those thirsts. In addition, at each staff meeting, you probably remember from last year me talking about having staff take some time to reflect on their focus area, which I will continue to do this year, and that is a focus area selected through the teacher evaluation process. But in addition, we're going to take the time each month to reflect on a high impact teaching strategy that we're working on in our classroom and just do some internal reflection, because I don't think we take enough time to just really sit and reflect. And I actually had a staff member that thanked me for that. Sometimes it feels awkward because everyone's, it's completely silent, but to just give everyone that permission and that opportunity to really reflect on their practice and how things are going and what they could do to move forward. So we're really going to utilize that information on the HITS that we want to focus more on as a staff, as well as honor those individual high impact teaching strategies and give teachers that opportunity to reflect and figure out next steps to move forward and be able to implement those in their classrooms.
Can I just ask a quick
Sure.
question? Did you say you built those into their current teacher evals?
I didn't build those in. The focus area is currently built in, and so each staff meeting, once a month, I have a certain agenda, and as part of that, we take some time and reflect on our focus area. So if a teacher picked something from Domain 2 that had to do with planning, they would reflect on that. But in addition to that, I would like to bring in the HITS. So each month at the staff meeting, also give them an opportunity to really reflect on those high impact teaching strategies that they've identified and needing more growth on, and kind of what they're doing to move forward with that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Data digs are a vital piece of something that we have done and will continue to do. And just last week at grade level meetings, we had the opportunity for interventionists, classroom teachers, and myself to really look at that universal screening data, dig deep, and figure out next steps to best help all of the students in their classroom. We did that again with kindergarten teachers in the past data, which I'll talk about a little bit later, but this is a regular part of those grade level meetings to really look at the data and have informed discussions about what we can do to help all students achieve to their highest level. the what I need, I'm sorry, a little bit more. The what I need or win block was really redefined this year. It's a 40-minute block. And for grades 1 and 2, all of the classes, so all the grade 1 classes have the win block at the same time. And the same thing goes for grade 2. Part of the rationale behind that is that it allows students to be able to work with different teachers. Teachers can share students and do skill-based groups. So last year I had 3 teachers that did a walk to math. So they shared students during that win block that needed similar skills in math. And I'm going to have them present at the November staff meeting, not only their kind of journey, but the data as well, because my hope is to see that grow. Part of the reason for scheduling it so all grade 1s have the win at the same time and all grade 2s have the win at the same time is so they can have students move to different classes based on the skills that they need and group them like that. So that's really something that I want to see us move forward with and grow beyond those 3 teachers that did it last year. Part of the win block also involves enrichment opportunities in the media center. And this year, the library media teacher has really embraced STEM. Just today, they were trying to work on building bridges, and they're doing lots of different STEM opportunities for students during the enrichment time. So I think that's something that's really grown since the start of this year and is something that is exciting for the media center and certainly the students. If you're wondering, well, why didn't I mentioned grade 1 and 2 having it at the same time and not kindergarten? The rationale for that is that in kindergarten, for the first few months of school until the winter screening, the interventionists push in during the win block, and I have 3 interventionists and 5 kindergartens, so schedule-wise, I couldn't have them do it at the same time. The real positive about that, though, and having them be able to push in, going to the next bullet, the phonological awareness piece. So we've talked already tonight about past. And in talking with our Literacy How coach, Wendy, that's in our building, she shared a really great resource with us. Michael Hegarty is the author, but it's a phonemic awareness resource. So I was able to purchase those for the kindergarten teachers. The interventionists already have that resource. There's one specific for kindergarten. It looks at a systematic way to insert phonemic awareness in kindergarten. So we're going to be utilizing that resource during the win block in kindergarten. The interventionists last week after the data dig began to talk with the teachers that they're paired with about what that might look like. And it's going to look different in each room based on the skill level and based on that initial past data. But they will be pushing in to support phonological awareness in the kindergarten classroom. And then when they begin to take formal students in the second screening window, the classroom teachers will continue and carry on that instruction during that block. So that's something that I'm really excited about. It's kind of grown a little bit more because we had some really nice discussions as a intervention team, as a EL bilingual team, which I'll get into in just a minute, about how to best support phonological awareness. So I'm looking to purchase that resource for the pre-K classes as well, because there's a pre-K resource, there's a K, and there's a grade 1. That kind of is a nice segue to EL bilingual. EL bilingual is also going to be benefiting from those resources. In addition, EL bilingual has a common planning time with intervention in the morning. They've had a thirst for this and asked me about this in the past because they oftentimes will share students. And so to really make sure instruction is the most meaningful for the students on their caseload, they have a time that they can work to collaborate together. EL bilingual is also planning, just met today with their sister school, EL bilingual staff from Pond Hill, and they're planning a family night event to really be able to help parents best help support their students in reading. STARS. I want to share some strides that the autism classes are taking this year in terms of moving us forward and getting those achievement rates to get as high as possible. I was able to train the STARS teachers on ERLA and STAR, and their students took ERLA and STAR this year, except for 2 students that are nonverbal. But the rest of the students were able to engage in those assessments to get some baseline data, and the teachers will be using those through the goal setting process. In addition, the teachers are really thirsty to get into classrooms to see what I have one of the teachers in the STARS program is going actually tomorrow into a first grade to observe guided reading groups in action because she has one student that pushes into that room for inclusion. So they're really looking to try to connect as best as they can and taking all opportunities to connect with the gen ed teacher and, really spend time in the room seeing what those groups look like in action. So those are some strides that we'll continue to take and move forward with so that the students in the autism classes can push in to the gen ed classes and the teachers have a really good understanding of what's going on in there and what that looks like. The Literacy How coaches started coming to Stevens, and they come every other week, alternating with Moses Y. Beach. The really great part about this is not only are they working with one of our interventionists and our special education teachers, but those teachers push into gen ed classes, so they're able to work with the students in those classes as well. So it's really sprinkled throughout, and the coaches have already provided some really great resources and recommendations for us. Now to kind of jump away from the academics and talk a little bit about recess. Recess is something over the years, going into my 4th year now, that I've tried to work really hard on, because when you take kids the ages of 3 to 8 and you put them in a more unstructured setting, you sometimes have students that have a harder time solving a problem or using those self-regulation skills to work through a situation. So one thing that we've done this year at Stevens, which is different and which I have on the slide for a reason, is we've implemented options and more of a station approach. So staff is stationed in 3 different spots, and there's different items and materials. So, and this is something that I heard even over the years through PTO and PTAC, it would be great if there were more things outside. It'd be great if there were more things. So we have a picnic table in one area where there's opportunities for students to color if they want. They can play with cars, they can do bubbles. There's obviously basketballs, there's things to use on the field, and that's part of that same station. There's a playscape area, and then there's swings, and there's some other items like scoops and other field equipment that they can use in that area. So really the rationale behind it is that there's options for them, so they're not all on the playscape or not all heading out to the field, and we've actually put a little bit of a limit to that and brought a line, created a line on the field so they have kind of a more appropriate boundaries for their ages, but really working hard to reflect with the recess staff and really try to just get those options out there so students have different things that they can do once they're outside. Certainly if a student has a difficult situation or a difficult time, we have a reflection form that we use as a school, which has the child identify a replacement behavior. So next time, instead of pushing their friend because their friend took the ball from them, they have the opportunity to dialogue with myself and come up with a replacement behavior so that they can do something more appropriate the next time. And that goes home to the parents, because I do believe bringing the parents in, having the parents accountable is a huge piece of it, so that a copy goes to the parent, myself, and the teacher as well. So really working hard on recess and hoping we can see those numbers go down on the recess referrals. And as we move forward, we're continuing with those family and community partnerships. Stevens is in the best spot because it's right near DAG and Lyman Hall. So we have partnerships there that actually both of those started last year, and they're going to continue this year. With DAG, the Promote Reading Club works with our students to really help them to kind of get excited about reading and move them forward. The child development class at Lyman Hall built us a sensory hallway and is actually working with us on some upcoming events. So they're a really great partner, in addition to a lot of the community partnerships we have. Married and Child Guidance we've worked closely with, and they'll be coming back for a 3rd year for the trauma-based groups. And I'm looking forward to the new Space Center and really being able to connect families at Stevens with that exciting opportunity so we can continue to build partnerships. So those are some ways that Stevens is moving forward during the 2019-20 school year to get those achievement scores up. At Stevens, we believe in working collaboratively with all teammates, so that's including staff, students, parents, administration, and community partners. So thinking about a baseball team, everyone's a part of the team and has a critical role to move us forward with achievement scores, school climate, and school safety. And I don't know how I missed it, but on the celebration slide, there was one more celebration that I wanted to celebrate, and so I'm going to do it now because it's connected to school safety. During the 2018-19 school year, the staff and the students at Stevens really embraced the ALICE model. In addition to that, we piloted SILACs, which is a web-based way to communicate, and it gets to that I in ALICE, so the inform, so you can send information. So our lockdown drills were scenario-based through SILACs, so staff would be able to log in, get the scenario, and use their judgment to respond accordingly. I couldn't be prouder of the conversations that occurred between staff and students, even thinking about our young students. Conversations about how to respond to different situations, knowing where all the exits were in the building, how to barricade if need be, and you wonder how that's going home and getting conveyed to parents. And last month at our PTAC, Kristen and I shared some achievement updates, climate updates, and some school safety updates. And parents there said, I just want to mention my first grader. It happens with such ease, and they were just really complimentary about the way the drills have gone, even for our youngest learners. And to me, that was the best testament to successful trainings and a staff that really embraced ALICE and SILACs as we move forward to keep school safety at the forefront. So,
Ms. Raggio?
Okay, I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget it.
I wrote your name down so I didn't forget it also.
We're good. When you spoke about the phonological awareness resource and that you purchased it for your kindergarten group and that there is a resource for pre-K and also for first grade, is that something that we're doing district-wide, or is each principal deciding what resources to buy that may be recommended from Literacy How?
I'm just hearing about this, so it'll be something that we could take a look at to see if it complements our existing curriculum in the other grade levels.
Okay.
Because that's really also very important.
Yeah, they have some wonderful resources, and just because I have purchased them personally, I know there's group discounts that I don't qualify for because I don't need that many copies. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Purcell?
I just want to say your climate data is, very, very good, which is awesome.
Thank you.
And, the parents and everybody feel very comfortable in your school. The only question I have is the staff climate data, again, came in very awesome, but it was only 17 out of 79.
Right.
Is there a way we can get
There
that up?
is. So that was from the last time we implemented the district climate survey. So I've thought about some different approaches to address that, because that to me is not the most accurate data if we only have 17 out of 79 completing the survey. So I've thought about even building in time. I meet with the paras on a monthly basis, and I meet with the certified staff on a monthly basis. So even building in some time at the very end of those meetings to be able to have them do that, or just providing more opportunities, even if it's having the Chromebook set up in our conference room, even if it's more reminders. Something I do with SILACs, I talked about SILACs as the web-based system, is I make an announcement every morning just reminding staff to log in. So even if it's something as simple as just reminding them we're in the window, we have 10 more days left to fill out the survey. Please, please fill it out. We have so many that have responded thus far. I think just trying to pump it up and make them excited, but also looking at other venues that I could get them all in one spot to complete it.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Where are we on? Pond Hill.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Kristen Valero, principal of Pond Hill School. Feels very different being up here my second year in. Last time I came, it was 2 months, and it was overwhelming. The first thing I want to say when I start to share my plan is that nothing that I talked to you about this evening was done in isolation. This is a collaborative effort based on the entire staff having some input. And when I say entire staff, I mean my paras, my recess and lunch aides, parents, and even students. So I have to commend them all for their hard work and giving me input and really valuing the process of working to move our school forward. So some of the highlights. Our theme for this year at Pond Hill is look for the good. So that every day in everything that we do, sometimes it's easy to be brought down. So we remind ourselves and we remind each other to look for the good things that happen each and every day. If it's the child who came in and put a smile on our face, if it is the success of a lesson, and then sharing those as we gather to dismiss the students at the end of the day, that's something that once the kids are gone and the staff is there, we kind of just share out a little bit of all the positive things that happened in our day. So looking at some of the data, last year in our STAR data, we ended our year with 67% overall of our students scoring at or above the proficiency level, which was a 12% increase from the start of the school year. Our math STAR data, let me go back for 1 second. We started the 2019 school year, and our baseline shows that we're at about 49% of the students at the proficiency level in STAR reading. So we have room to grow, as it shows from our end of the year last year, ending at that 67%. STAR Math, we ended our school year last year with 75% of the students in third grade at proficiency, 63% of fourth graders, and 69% of fifth graders. This was an aha for me or an eye-opening piece because it didn't correlate to the Smarter Balance data. And so it's really causing us to take a deep look at how our students are performing, both on the STAR and the Smarter Balance, to look at that correlation and think about why and what's happening. And we'll get into those action steps in the curriculum piece in just a little bit. So Smarter Balance, some of the glows in our reading was an overall increase of 7% from last year. And our cohort data from students scoring a 3 to 4 year to year shows an increase in third grade of 18% and 16% in fifth grade, and the cohort shows an increase of 11% in last year's fifth grade from their fourth grade scores. So we are seeing improvements overall in some of those areas, but an area that we need to continue to grow is our cohort data from our fifth grade class, and it decreased 4% in students scoring at or above that proficiency level. So again, looking at student by student, who that is and why that is, and developing plans, individualized plans for each student in those areas. Math, our GLOWS overall data, it did stay the same from 17-18 to the 18-19 school year. And again, like I pointed out, our data in the STAR and our data in the Smarter Balance are not aligning, and we need to come up with the reason why that is, why our students aren't performing as high as they could and should on that math portion of the test. Also looking at our subgroup data, working with our special education teachers, our L bilingual teachers, to really look at why our students in those subgroups are not achieving at the high levels that we know that they can. Is it the test itself? Is it the testing environment? Is it that perhaps we're setting too many goals for the students? Maybe we need to be better aligned, and that's one of the areas that we're looking at this year, is all of the teachers having that time to meet and plan and look at each student and creating an individualized plan to help them grow. Our focus academically. This year we're going to continue to work on strengthening Tier 1 instruction. We couldn't do that without the dedication of our staff and the opportunity for all staff this year to receive coaching. It's a great opportunity for the staff to sit with the coach and have those targeted discussions about how they can better improve in their classroom. A big push for me is having a plan for everyone. Every student should have a goal, and everybody should know what their goal is. If only we know the goal, how are we expecting students to achieve that? What do they need to work on? And communicating those goals with the kids and having them work with us to collect the data. They really need to know where they are and where they'd like to get to, and there's nothing better than when somebody runs into your office to get a high five because they achieved their goal. And when it's their goal, they own it and they want to get there. So we are working on different ways to set goals with students and then having staff share those ways with each other. We are looking into that deep dive into the needs of all of the students. I'm working closely with the representative from Renaissance to look at what our students are struggling on. What is STAR telling us in those indicators? One of the big things that we're noticing is figurative language is an area where the students are falling, and so that's something that we need to embed into our everyday practice and into that small group instruction. We are also focused at Pond Hill on the HITs, those high-impact teaching strategies, looking at all of them. We've created a document of what the HITs will look like in our classrooms at Pond Hill. For me, one of the biggest things is planning. If we're not well planned and ready for our day, the rest becomes a challenge. So that's where we started this year, is really taking a look at how we're planning each instructional block. And then moving on to all the rest. It's a living document, and as we find and see new things that we've embedded those HITs, I give it to feedback to teachers. Hey, you did a great job today with questioning. Add that to our document so that it can live and breathe every day, and it's a resource. Teachers can go into there and say, I'm really having a hard time with scaffolding. Let me see what some of my colleagues are using, and how can I bring that into my classroom? Specific targeted small group instruction throughout the day, giving kids, again, what they need, and grouping those kids based on the skills that they need work in. Every classroom has ERLA kits in them so that they can use them daily for their reading instruction. Every day we have an enrichment and remediation block, 3 days a week, or 3 days in the 6-day cycle focused on reading, 3 days are focused on math. And those are skill-based groups based on the data that we collect from those assessments and from the computational fluency. We are incorporating the Wiley Bevins Phonics program that Angela talked about earlier and Christina also talked about, using that in the classroom as a tool. As our students get a little bit older, that phonics, not all kids need every bit of phonics instruction. So looking at where they are and bringing them where they need to be. And then tightening up our SRBI process and really monitoring and analyzing the data that's used in the intervention block. Our interventionists take turns coming to the different grade level meetings to give updates to teachers about where the students are, what they're noticing, and then ways that they can support in the classroom. I've also created an advisory committee. So I have a few different subcommittees. I have a math and a literacy on the academic end, and they help with all of the decisions that are made academically. We look for trends and patterns in the building and then look for ways that we can improve in those areas. So we've met quite a few times, and one of the things that the math committee has already done in response to our math data is we had a math night. And I will tell you that it was one of the most eye-opening things was to hear a parent say, everybody needs this, because I had no idea how kids were learning math. I knew it was different, but I didn't know what it was. And we talked sometimes about that new math. So parents had a workshop that was geared specifically for them while kids were with future teachers from Quinnipiac University playing math games. And then when the parents were done in the workshop setting, they moved station to station and teachers facilitated math games that then they were able to take home so that they can work on with their children at home. And hearing somebody say that, we started that conversation of how can we get this out to more people. So one of the things that we talked about with our math coach is having her do a number talk and videotaping it and linking that into those e-blasts that go home so that learning can continue. And I think that's a way that we are going to see progress in the area of math on those test scores, is to enable parents to understand the math language that we're using, because quite frankly, it is a different language, and it's very different than what we've all learned. So that was a big benefit that we've already done this year. Culture and climate. Our attendance team meets monthly. We are working to address high levels of absences in certain students. We bring parents in, we make plans. I can give you an example of a student I had that wasn't coming because she had a textural issue and she didn't want to put clothes on in the morning. And she would cry and not want to come to school. So the plan came in but she never wanted to disappoint me. So she would have to call herself out and talk to me. So she didn't want to, but if she was having a hard day, she would call and say, can you meet me outside? And we would go at the day together. So we started to see an increase in those. Some it was, levels of sickness or, things beyond our control, but any ways that we could help a family to make sure that their child was in school in a non-judgmental way is what we've tried to do as a committee. Also, in our culture and climate, we are looking for proactive approaches instead of reactive approaches to discipline, thinking about why things are happening, why are students acting in a certain way. Nobody wants to be in trouble or do something wrong. So what can we do to make sure that we're addressing that before things happen? So a few things that we've done. This year, I've had some time with the lunch recess aides, which tends to be a hot spot because it is an unstructured time, as we've talked about already. And having an opportunity for them to discuss with us some of the challenging behaviors that they encounter, and then giving them some proactive ways to handle those before it gets to that level. So for example, if it's somebody who has a really hard time standing in line when the whistle blows, maybe that's the person that needs to do one last scan to make sure that nothing was left outside. In the cafeteria, you have a hard time waiting in the lunch line. Well, maybe you're laying out the ID cards for the next group that comes in so that you don't have to wait in line, and the line is almost gone by the time you finish with that task. So that has seemed to cut down, and it's only been a few weeks since that discussion, but the feedback from them was this was a really positive thing, was to be able to have those discussions. The other thing that we've done this year, and my staff has amazed me. I had an idea at the end of last year to have a place for students who just need a minute, and that doesn't need to be the main office. We all need a minute sometimes, and so do kids. So I said, here's my thought. And I had a group of staff who said, we want to do it. And we have now a mindful space that is in our building. It is a space for children to go to take a minute. There's no conversation that happens. They identify their zone of regulation that they're in. There's the different color zones. Then they can go to either a beanbag chair or a hard chair. They can sit on, there's little carpeting for them. They can sit there and they can do an exercise. So every classroom teacher is teaching the students different types of either breathing techniques or calm down strategies that they can use. And then there's a little game, and it's a 2 to 3 minute spot that they can come into. They go back, they identify where their color is at that time, and if they're ready to go back to class. We also have a space in there for students who, per their IEP, need a separate workspace at times. So again, it's a very positive place for them to take their work, get some of their independent work done, and then go back to that big room of 23 that sometimes is a little bit overwhelming.
How big is the space?
It's a classroom space that's divided
Okay.
into a work area and then the mindful.
So how many students can it accommodate at the same time?
There's space for 3 at a time, and I have not seen more than 2 to this
That
point.
worked out well.
Yes, yes. And, really it's a space that the kids like, and they're very respectful of that. It's a 2 to 3 minute.
Right.
You're not here to be punished. We're not going to talk about that behavior. We're just going to give you a minute to kind of reset and be ready to go back into the
So
classroom.
that they can go from yellow to green and be ready to go back.
Yes.
I saw it in action. I was at the school a few weeks back, and it was being used very appropriately. And I think that, again, the setup, it's a welcoming environment. So it's definitely not a punitive environment. It's not a place where they feel anything other than this is a good place for them to recognize themselves that they need a break. And rather than maybe doing something that's going to get them into more serious situation, they know how to remove themselves, use that space. The staff was in there, they were processing with the students. It was very effective.
So that was the question I had. Is there an adult that's
Yes,
always
always.
Yeah.
So, there are, and we know where all the adults are in the building. So if your schedule says that you're in this room during this time, to step out for 2 minutes to assist, to bring the student across, I'm always available. They can hear me click down the hallway, so they know. They're like, can you? And so, yes, we can take them.
So you also indicate in your write-up that there are 2 areas in the building that have sensory activities.
Yes, so there's 2 hallways. One, and if you're familiar with the building, on the lower level, as you're going out to that recess area, on the wall is a pattern of activities for students to use who need sensory breaks. We have a lot of students who have that sensory break built into their daily schedule, and some that just you know, they've sat for so long, it's time to get some energy out. And there's also one in our helper hallway, which is where our speech language pathologist, psychologist, social worker are housed. Again, there is a pattern of activities that a student can engage in that don't have any adult interaction, because sometimes they don't want to hear from us.
Right.
They just need a minute, and they need a place to get some energy out.
Right.
It's also something that's used by our STARS students quite regularly, and it's just in multiple places in the building so that everybody can access.
Sometimes they
movement.
need to get the energy out, and
Yes.
sometimes there's just too much sensory input coming in, and they need a place where it's quiet and
Yes.
calm and.
And that's where that mindful space comes in. It's very quiet, a little soft.
When I'm looking at your discipline data,
Mm-hmm.
okay, you have 0 bus suspension, so
Oh, so I wanted to get to that. So I ride the bus.
I was wondering what you were doing, because bus is always an issue for a lot of schools.
So I do ride the bus, and the bus drivers do tease me a little bit. They said, "Yeah, we heard you get on the bus and ride it home." So I do take rides on the bus, and then they bring me back to school after the bus rides are complete. So when a bus driver expresses, like, the kids are getting a little bit, you know, rowdy on the bus, and I know it's a hard time for them. They've sustained all day long, and now they have a long
Yeah.
bus ride. So I just get on and take the ride with them, because they need to know that it is an extension of the school day, and those same rules apply. So if you are driving and you think you see me on the bus, you probably do.
Well, thank you for that.
That's the bus for you if we say.
Yes, please. You know, and they call me out in the morning. They do call and ask me to come out sometimes in the morning, and I'll say, all right, so at the end of the day, when you come back, I'll hop on with you, we'll take the ride, and you can bring me back at the end of the route. And it has cut down quite a bit. And then asking students to be honest, to tell me if you see something, say something, because then we need to make those seat adjustments on the bus to make sure that everybody's getting home safe, because that's our main priority. And so I also have a group that looks at those cultural and operation pieces as part of my advisory. So there's 4 components to my advisory group. I have the 2 academics, the math and the literacy, and then climate culture and operations, which is just the daily runnings of the school. How can we make those adjustments to make things go better every day? I also spent a little bit of time, thanks to Mrs. Latour's recommendation over the summer, of reading Hacking School Discipline, and looking at that, again, proactive, restorative approach to handling the students and not being reactive, but being proactive. And so what we're doing at some of our staff meetings is I'm summarizing the book as to not buy one for everybody, and we're doing a study and answering some really good targeted questions that Lisa had shared with me about that book, so that staff can kind of start to think a little bit differently about how we approach discipline. And related to that, we're really looking at that referral form and thinking about, what does this mean? What does it mean when somebody's disrespectful? Because it may mean something different to you and to me. And if we're seeing that, kids are, to me, it's feeling a little bit disrespectful. How do we start to teach and model things that are a little bit better suited for the school environment? And if we don't model it, how are they ever going to learn? So that's what we're doing in terms of culture and climate. I did touch upon our mindful space, which is just one of the things I am absolutely the most proud of. And what teachers have said in their anecdotal feedback to me is that kids are it's enabling them to get through whatever it is a lot quicker and back to the academic setting. They're not missing as much time, whether it be having a tantrum, so to speak, where they just can't come back from it. Being able to remove themselves, take a few minutes, and go back into that space has really enabled them to access their education better, and that's what we want. And then we continue our second step lessons every day 6 in every classroom, and all of our support staff pushes into the various classrooms to teach those lessons with the staff, with the teachers. Communication-wise, families get a weekly e-blast from the main office. Teachers send newsletters. Some have classroom pages where they keep families informed, and those pages are private and just for the parents who sign up. And I send also a Monday memo to my staff with just important information that they need for the week, and then anything that's necessary to be linked into that is in there. Our family engagement, we have family nights. We already held our math night this year, and we will look for more opportunities to perhaps have another math night. We are planning our Veterans Day celebration as we speak, so we are looking forward to that. Our special persons lunch will happen shortly after Veterans Day. We do have quite a few mystery readers. We had a lot of people come in for Hispanic Heritage Month to share their love of the culture and to read some books in the Spanish language, which was really neat for the kids, who, especially the ones that are new to taking Spanish. That was a lot of fun for them. We have parent volunteers that come into the classrooms and do activities. We are going to be the host school for a night for students with hearing impairments throughout the district. So we're looking forward to that. Our L teachers, as Christina mentioned, we're together today planning a night for our families. Our two teachers traveled to Ecuador this summer and had the opportunity to see things from a different lens and understand how parents from the Spanish culture see education a little bit different and aren't always sure what questions to ask and how to help their children. So in a proactive approach, we are inviting them in for a night to spend with us so that we can help them navigate that process. And then our PTO partnership is beyond anything I could ever ask for. They are in the school daily, helping in any way they can. If you call, they're there. If you send an email, they're on it, and it's a great way to build community. Our partnerships, we have a partnership with Fit to Go, so we have a group of students who participate. That is a program through the Y that is after school, and then at the completion of the Fit to Go, they get a family membership to the Y, so it brings their family in. Junior Achievement is coming in December. We do have our before and after school program with the SAGE program, the Connecticut STEM Academy. I happen to be lucky enough to have one of my teachers who's part of that, but brings in staff members to do those STEM activities with all grades throughout the year. And as I was on my way here, I got the email that said our bilingual department is also partnering with SCOW to do some activities with the students, and they're looking at opportunities to bring them in this month to do some activities with the L bilingual students. And professional growth will continue with our district PD, differentiated PD at staff meetings and building-based PD days, giving teachers what they need, and having teachers learn from teachers, because I believe that the answer is a lot of times in the room. And if we share things in isolation, we're not reaching as many people. So we're gonna have teachers teaching teachers this year. And what hits look like in real life at Pond Hill every day. How does it live and breathe, and not just on a document that we hang on our wall, but how does that really affect our everyday learning? And again, I have to give one more shout out to everybody that helped. And in addition to my staff, I'm lucky enough to have some amazing colleagues that my 3-5 partners by 5:30 every morning, I think we're talking and texting and really processing how our days will look. And I couldn't be more thankful to have Mrs. Kiley, because her and I spent quite a bit of time doing that vertical alignment and thinking about what is it going to look like for students coming out of Stevenson into Pond Hill, and how can we make that as smooth as possible. So we spent a lot of time over the summer meeting and talking about those things.
Ms. Raccio, you have a question?
I noticed in your improvement plan that you're considering live streaming meetings with families. What type of challenges have you considered in doing that?
So that was one of the PTO recommendations, and at this point we're going to hold off a little bit because there have been some challenges that were discussed at our last meeting.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Ms. Costelli?
Christine, this is not necessarily just for you, but for all of you guys. Do we ever look at the STAR scores and the other classroom work, or the other measures within the classroom of students? And is there ever, does it pretty much seem to correlate, or are there sometimes anomalies where, geez, this kid does so great on everything I'm giving him, but his STAR score is terrible? are there a lot of, so you're shaking your head, yes, Carrie. You know, I'm a big believer in all these score things are you know, a snapshot in time. You know, they kind of concern me when we put, I don't want us to put so much weight on it. I don't want to ignore them. But I also want to make sure that we're looking at the whole picture and the whole child versus just the scores.
Well, and I think you've heard me say that, you know, we don't look at any one data point exclusively. You piece them all together as part of a puzzle in addition to what you see day to day in the classroom, the feedback that you get from others, you know, teachers in the child's life and at home as well. And that's how you make decisions moving forward. You know, especially at the elementary age, you will see conflicting data points. Really strong STAR scores, classroom performance may not be to the same level, vice versa. It could be based on a particular skill or content. It could be a particular assessment. You know, and that's why, you know, as the child grows, and if there's an area of difficulty that the whole team talks, it's not one person making a decision. It's not one piece of data that we're looking at, because every student is very unique in how they approach their learning.
Mrs. LaTour, this is kind of a question for you. On that note, I think last time I noticed that our STAR data comes out a lot higher than our SBAC data. Is there a plan in place to kind of look at those benchmarks? Or is it just the report, back to the report that projects the SBAC scores?
No, they do look at the report that projects, and then they look at, you know, all of the pieces of data for the student. They look at what the instruction should look like. They look at what skills are in deficit versus what skills are strong, and they plan instruction. So you've heard a lot through all of the presentations so far about these high-impact teaching strategies and how we need to leverage those in order to get students to consistently own the standards of English language arts, math, social studies, and science, what they need to do to move forward.
But those
But you could
specific
do
STAR
all
benchmarks.
of that. And a student on any given day is going to perform how they're going to perform. And so that's the tough part. You could have a student that has mastery of every standard through classroom experience, through STAR scores, but on the day they take the Smarter Balance, it doesn't go as well as they would have liked it to go, or doesn't do well on STAR, is in intervention and shows classroom struggle, but performs really well on the Smarter Balance. So it really, you know, it's tough to predict any one moment that a child sits down to take a test on a computer. So what we are doing is looking at all of our standards, looking for trends, making sure that our curriculum is followed with fidelity, making certain that we have small group instruction that hits the needs of students, that we have plenty of evidence and we collect a body of evidence that shows that a student is mastering the standards consistently. And that's how we move forward.
Thank you.
I just have a question, just to remind me. I don't know if it was last year or the year before, did we change our benchmark score for STAR? I know we discussed it because we were concerned about the scores at that time as relation. I know Mrs. Medancy is specifically in math. I thought we adjusted it.
We did, we bumped them up.
That's what I thought, okay. So the thing is that,
So our proficient starts at the 50th percentile, where in years past, it was
started
not
at
as
the-
high.
yeah, so we actually, we made it more, we
Rigorous.
tried to make the STAR even more rigorous because we were trying to do that alignment, so we might, I don't know, as you all review it, and I know Ms. Medancy is reviewing it as well as everyone else, do we look at potentially raising that again to kind of do a course adjustment? I don't know. I don't know
You can
STAR's
raise your
analytics.
benchmarks to anything you want to raise them. And you can put your intervention band up to the 30th percentile if you wanted to, or 35th percent, you know, and then you'll have a lot of students in intervention. So you kind of have to balance,
Well, I'm not
you
saying the
know.
intervention side. I'm just wondering, and I don't know if you could go back in time to do this.
Yeah.
Is if we were to look at our students from last year, the
Mhm.
last STAR scores, could we go back in and change the band raise it to see whether or not now the new scores are more, have a greater relation to the SBAC scores?
We look at the SBA benchmarks to see how they compare with our SBA scores, not just the regular universal screen.
Okay.
So I
So that
don't
wouldn't
know
help,
if I'm
yeah.
getting.
Yeah, that
it
wouldn't
would
help.
changing
I'm just trying to
the
figure out
universal
the
screen
missing
portion
benchmarks
of the
isn't
question.
gonna help.
As a
Isn't gonna
parent,
do that.
when
Yeah,
I
it's
look
not
at
gonna
my
do that.
students' STAR scores and then the SBA,
There's not
you
a
probably know,
correlation.
they didn't match
Yeah.
for one of mine. And I didn't get what I was expecting for one of mine. And so it caught me off guard. So if it's, I don't know if other parents are experiencing the same thing, but
Yeah.
I feel like when I'm looking at this data across the board, those STAR scores are higher than the SBAC. We don't call them SBAC anymore, SBA?
They're called, it's called the SBA.
SBA.
Yeah.
I'll call them CMT, no. It just doesn't correlate and it doesn't sit right with me. So
No, and
that's what I'm getting at.
I hear what you're saying. I think that there are those places. So, Mr. Votto, while I was about to ask a question or make a comment, said, you know, are we aligning? Are we making sure everything's in alignment? Are we looking at our curriculum? Are we looking at our testing? I think that's an ongoing process that we do on an annual basis. I'm confident, and I believe it is. I mean, I don't believe there's a disconnect between our curriculum and the assessments, the SBAC or SBA. SBA. Connecticut couldn't afford the C. So the thing is, sorry. But the thing is that I do believe there is an alignment between our curriculum. I think there's a relatively strong alignment. I think it comes down to the STAR not necessarily being a clear indicator. So we have to figure that out, and I know we are continuing to look at that. But I think there's elements, it's tough because there's elements of everything that.
Well, there's value, a lot of value in STAR in that it's identifying skills, strengths and weaknesses. So I do think that's important. It's just when you don't know what you're looking for and you see one thing and then you see something else on that
Correct.
SBA, you know, it just doesn't always sit well.
And I think
that's
we
my
see
point.
it, and I
That's
think we
my
see
point.
it more so, and you know, I have a room full of people who could correct me, but I think math becomes more of a challenge than the English language arts piece because we have the other layers for English language arts, like we were talking about. So math, it's our single indicator, our single standardized measure besides the ESPA. And then you have your curriculum, you have your assessments that the teachers are giving throughout the course of the year. So I think that's the challenge. There are other, you know, nationally recognized assessments that we can consider, but I think every single one has their challenges. There's the NWEA and all these other ones, but they all come with that inconsistency on some level. So I think it's a challenge, but I do think going back to our curriculum, I think our teachers and our administrators, our coordinators have worked very hard on the curriculum. I think our curriculum is not a concern. I think it's more of just seeing how these all relate to each other. But you're not the only parent who has stopped us and said, hey, I kind of got a surprise when I opened up the mail. And we feel, you know, we take that to heart. And actually we were at the STEM night and we were talking to a family and Miss Medancy was there as well. And, you know, we all took to heart what the person was saying and we're trying to figure it out. And as I'm talking, I'm seeing the heads shake of our administrators in the audience that there's an agreement there.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, last but not least, Ms. Carlson.
Thank you. Would you lose my tab? All right, I'll get started while Mrs. Latour brings that up. So I'm Lisa Carlson. I am a second-year principal over at Rock Hill. So I just wanted to thank you for giving me the opportunity to spotlight my school. Certainly a proud principal as I enter into the second year. You should have in front of you the school improvement plan, but I also have, so I'm not going to talk off of the school improvement plan. I tried to make a condensed version for which I needed my notes to follow, and it just made sense that you could look ahead and track it as well. I'm going to apologize for all of the words. I certainly will not read all of the bullets, but it was really my trail of thinking, so I wanted you to be sure that you had it as well. So we are in our second year with me at leading, I guess, flying the, driving the car, flying the plane, whatever it is that we are working on together as a staff. For our Rock Hill School Improvement Plan, as Ms. Valero talked about, this is a plan that all of our hands in our building, our staff had hands on. We have reviewed it together during grade level meetings, during staff meetings, during leadership advisory meetings. So an opportunity to have everyone's voice and eyes on our plan as we drive our school forward. One of the things that sits on our school improvement plan are sort of some belief statements for Rock Hill, and the only one I really want to focus on is the third bullet, which is about tonight, that we really are focused on growing all of our students academically, socially, and emotionally. So the first bit is just on academics, and I wanted just to let you know which data sets we were using as we looked at where our school was for our performance data. And as you heard tonight, of course, we're using STAR Reading and STAR Math, and in addition to all the many reports that we can get, we are also using the screening reports, the state standard mastery class reports. We're using our ERLA reading data. We're using our Smarter Balanced for ELA and for math, and drilling down into Smarter Balance, looking at not only proficiency, but looking at the claims and the targets inside of Smarter Balanced and the growth targets, and then also using our lost links data. So that is just a glimpse at the data sets that we were using. So these observations that are here, and I won't read all of them, but I wanted you to know that we really took our data and we wanted to look at our cohorts, the kids that were in third grade in 17-18, and then in 18-19 in fourth grade, and then the fourth into fifth grade. And look, did we see any trends? Did anything emerge that we want to pay attention to as we look at propelling our school forward? And so as we looked at STAR data for STAR reading, the cohort from fourth to fifth, there was a decrease in 2%. So a nominal decrease, but a decrease nonetheless, of students scoring at or above the 50th percentile. When we looked at our ERLA data, there was also a decrease from third to fourth over the 2 years, and from fourth to fifth, that was a larger decrease of 7%. So certainly that jumps out at me as I consider, what could contribute to that decrease. Then I went into the SBAC ELA data to look at those cohorts as well. Big picture on students scoring proficiency, that is a level 3 or 4. We did have an increase, 4% total for Rock Hill. So that is a small celebration that we will take, that we were moving in the right direction as a school body. But when we look at the cohort, the fourth to fifth grade, we actually had a 7% increase in the fourth to fifth. So I think it's pretty interesting to think we dropped in STAR reading from fourth to fifth, and we dropped in ERLA from fourth to fifth, but yet our SBAC data went up from fourth to fifth. So just sort of interesting into the conversation that we had.
Are those taken, what time of year? I mean, is that part of the reason?
So this is our end of the year data.
All of it's
Our end of the year data. Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
So if we take a look at math and what's happening at Rock Hill in math, we have an increase in our cohort from third to fourth. We have a very, very small increase, but we'll take it in fourth to fifth. And we were looking comparatively at math and reading, and it's very interesting to look at how our students perform better on math than in reading. So we have a higher percentage of students performing at proficiency in math than in reading. So we really are looking at targeting reading as a focus area for Rock Hill. And just to look at our SBAC math data, and I still call it SBAC, I can't get into the SBA either. With our SBAC math data, we have an overall increase. So again, overall increase, 3% of our students scoring proficient 3 or 4, but looking at cohorts, third to fourth, a small decrease, and then again, there's that fourth to fifth, a decrease for math. So certainly interesting to consider what could be causing those. A lot of factors could go into that. And the same thing that we noticed in STAR is also prevalent in SBAC, where we have more third and fourth grade students scoring proficient on SBAC math than in SBA ELA. So interesting to consider. So I decided to dive a little bit further with staff into SBAC and see what does it offer for us? What kind of information can we get out of it? It just seems to be this anomaly that students take in the spring and they don't know much else about it. And teachers who are coming from CMT world, they remember how they used to dive into where the scores were low and then we would booster all of that. And this is so difficult to try to hone in. So we dug a little bit to see what we could come up with, and using EdSite and using the online reporting system through TIDE, we came up with some more information. So we were looking at the growth targets, and we're looking at our current 5th grade students. So they look at year 1 administration and year 2, and whether students met the growth projected by the assessment. So we have the percentage of growth targets achieved 5% greater in math than in SB ELA. We had, looking at our cohort data and our special groups, we wanted to think about what's happening with our special ed, with our limited English students, and of course, we have students in these subgroups that are performing, they're performing significantly less, a percentage less, I'm distracted, sorry. They're performing less, these students are making proficiency or meeting their growth targets than their non-special ed or non-LEP students. So we looked a little bit more at the high needs, which is our special ed, our free reduced, and our limited English. And those students who scored 1 and 2s on SBA did not meet their growth targets. So we have a focus on those students. Those students are the lower performing students in those high need groups. And conversely, another thing that we're looking at is we're looking at the non-high needs students who received 3s or 4s. They didn't meet their growth targets either. There was a lower percentage of those. So we want to also push and propel those students. So we have our sights on our subgroups, but we also have our sights on the kids who need enrichment, thinking about what can we do at Rock Hill to propel all of our students. So we're going to remediate and enrich. One of the things I also noticed on our report card from the state is that our performance gap between our high needs and our non-high needs continues to grow. So that's something for 2 years in a row, and I did put that data on that slide and on that page for you. We continue to grow in our achievement gap, and we really want to make that smaller, not bigger. So we're going to be focused on trying to make a dent in all of this data. Honing in on their claims and targets, so there's some ways to drill down on the state website where we can look at where are the areas where we can maybe try to target within grade levels. And one of the things we talked about, we noticed that listening came up weak as a strand for 3rd grade and 5th grade in particular, and it was something that also came up weak in loss. So of course we can figure out how we can weave opportunities for listening comprehension and opportunities for building that oral, the teacher oral language, reading out loud, building some comprehension that way with listening. We have, writing was weak in our 4th grade for the claim, so we drilled down into targets. We noticed that analysis within and across texts was weak in 3rd grade, and in 4th grade, the use of figurative language came up as a weakness, and across all of them, using text evidence to support claims for ELA. And as we looked at math, problem solving, communicating, reasoning, and familiarity with factors and multiples came up as areas to work on. So these are all things that I have shared with staff. We've looked at this data and we're going to target them within our classroom and try to really hone in on strengthening all of these areas. I also included 2 slides just so you could see our fall screening data. So the first data is our current screen for reading, just looking at cohorts, and I put in last year's fall data so you could sort of, again, look at the cohort data. But we have our current 4th graders were 37% at or above benchmark last year, now 45% at or above at the same time this year. And our current 5th graders went from 49% to 42%, so a little drop there. And if we look at our ERLA data in that same cohort, we have an increase of 10% for both cohorts, 3rd to 4th and 4th to 5th. So it's not apples to apples, we know that. It just presents with some interesting conversation topics as to why students may be gaining learning or losing learning, and what we're going to do about that as we make our plans. And we'll just take a quick peek at our math data. And we had a drop in our cohort from this time last year to this time this year, and an 8% for math 3rd to 4th, and an increase in 4% from 4th to 5th. So again, our target areas will be reading. While we'll still strengthen math, we're going to really try to hone in on reading. Our academic data, we're going to work on growing all of our students in literacy and in numeracy, but we're really going to focus on decoding and comprehending our text, focus on analyzing multiple texts and other sources, developing listening comprehension, using text evidence, focusing on the remediation and the universal design for learning for those high needs groups, and focusing also on the enrichment for the non-high needs groups to propel them forward as well. And in math, we'll weave in those other areas that identified on the claims and targets, the problem solving, the communicating, reasoning, and things like that. So as a staff, we're going to consider about growing ourselves and think, what can we do to build our own knowledge base and capacity so that we're able to teach our students and improve our overall achievement. So of course, we have embedded professional learning opportunities in our grade levels that we meet weekly in our staff meetings. And we're going to focus on data-driven decision-making, so really drilling down and using that data to make our decisions. We're going to embed the high-impact teaching strategies and focus on differentiation, that idea for that universal design for learning, that we're going to make every student successful. So we have to think about what they really need and that small group instruction. So the graph on that page, and I know that both Mrs. Kiley and Mrs. Valero talked about doing a self-reflection on the high-impact teaching strategies, and actually we had also done that at Rock Hill, and we had graphed it and looked at the graphs. So the graphs are quick representations where my staff is and which areas that they deem themselves to be really proficient in, or areas of growth. So we're going to work based on the graphs that we see. We're going to focus on purposeful planning, thinking about that curricular fidelity, setting connected and child-friendly learning targets and understanding why we're doing what we're doing and what our teaching is. Multiple exposures, thinking about how do we present things in different ways, different modalities, so that all of our learners can access that learning. And that differentiation, understanding what all of our learners need, whether they're limited English, whether they're special education students, whether they're high-level learners. We want to remove all the barriers and figure out what can we do for all of our students so they're successful. So how are we going to do that? I will not touch on all of these. I'll just gloss over some of the most important ones for this year. Of course, one of the most important things is to be sure that we have a schedule that supports our instructional blocks. And one of the things that we did this year was really move our literacy block. So every grade level, we have 2 pods in every grade level. And I really, when I did the master schedule, spread out the literacy blocks and spread out the math blocks and spread out the flex times so that service support and intervention can get into more classrooms and have more access without the conflicts that a shared time might present. So we're trying that schedule this year. Of course, we want to be sure that we're all owning the curriculum and implementation with fidelity. I talked about what we're going to focus on for our planning and our setting our learning targets, but one of the things that has already taken off, we've done 2 sessions already with our literacy coach and 1 with our math coach, is that all of our staff is involved in a Coaching for All experience, so that throughout the year they will all have an opportunity to interact with the coach in whichever way they feel would be most helpful to grow themselves professionally, to impact their students. And we're getting some really great feedback from that, so that's a wonderful opportunity that's happening. One new thing too this year is this idea that I'm putting specialists into the flex time for cross-curricular enrichment. So my specialists ended up with a 2nd extra block. And so what I asked them to do, I asked them to assign themselves, depending on where it fell, into a grade level. And they are actually developing cross-curricular units to do with a small group of kids. So in one of my pods, let's say there's 3 classrooms, and let's say it's PE. The PE teacher is pushing in to that set of classrooms and working with the classroom teachers on a core group of students, 6, 8, 10 students, that are in need of something more, and they are developing a little unit. So one unit right now is on the name Ninja Warriors, that show that all the kids like, where the athletes are doing those fancy sports activities. So the first part of the unit for them is to do some reading, do some research, do some ideas around maybe physical fitness, physical agility. And she's going to do some reading, she's going to do some writing, and then they're going to plan out what one of their activities would be, and then they'll have a culminating presentation of their Ninja Warrior activity that they'll bring it to a classroom. So we have this happening in music, in art, and in PE. So I'm really excited at the opportunity to be able to bring kids a new way of getting connected to learning and embedding reading, writing, and math into flex time for kids that need a little bit more. We have our interventionists putting forth some new programs, really excited about level literacy, foundations, and bridges. So we're anxious to see what kind of dent that might make in our learners who need that extra boost. For our professional learning, one of the things that I want to do as we try to build our capacity around high impact teaching strategies is I also want to bring to staff Marzano's The New Science of Teaching and Learning. It's the new one, and there's a whole training kit that goes along with that, with some videos to watch with staff and really talk about what makes teaching good teaching. So I'm excited to bring some professional work to staff. And I'm hoping to be able to, I was hoping that this would happen last year and we just didn't get to implement it the way I wanted. So we'll try again this year, but for learning walks, to get teachers into other spaces, to get them to see the good things that are happening around the building, to notice what students are doing and saying in all of our learning areas, and take away from that some big picture next step items based on what we did. So really trying to open up our spaces, I think, is really important. All right, that's a quick glimpse at our academic. We'll go quickly into our climate. I know you've been sitting for such a long time. Our climate data, again, we used our survey data for families, students, and staff. We used our behavior data for referrals and suspensions, and we used our attendance data for tardies and absences. So some quick observations about our climate data. We have about 6.5% of the student body was chronically absent, so that was up from the year previous. And we have about 21 students that were truant in 15-16, down to 17 in 16-17. The behavior data, so this is pretty interesting. We are pretty high on the office discipline referrals. Last year being my first year, I recorded anything that came to me in the way of an office discipline referral. So these aren't suspensions, these aren't detentions, these aren't anything like that. There's a combination. But I felt we needed to build our capacity. If teachers or lunch or recess aides felt they needed to fill out an office referral form, I wanted to track it. So I knew where we had to build our capacity on what is a minor referral, what are other ways we could handle it. So going forward this year, it will be interesting to see how this data this year compares to last year's data. Overall, we had 29 in-school suspensions. 72 referrals came from lunch and recess, so we have a lot of capacity to build with our aides out there. It's an unstructured setting for our students, and it is a very difficult time. So we have to work on how do we problem solve, how do we self-regulate, how do we give students breaks, how do we supervise so that we prevent rather than react. So we've got a lot of work to do. With our aides. Often our social worker and our psychologist will do boosters with our aides to meet with them, to review expectations, to teach them something new that they might not have known, so that we'll continue that learning this year as well. And so for our climate data, one of the things we continue to work on is just making sure that everybody feels safe in our building. For our students, we want everyone to understand that school is their absolute safe place. It is where they should come to learn and feel valued, and nothing should make them feel otherwise. Our parent goal this year will stay as it was last year. There is something that happens at Moses Y to Rock Hill, and we feel it, that there's a drop-off in parent volunteerism, there's a drop-off in parent participation at our school, and we really don't want that to happen. We want to figure out why is that. We want to build opportunities to get our families in. So we continue to work to get them to feel connected, included, and welcomed. We got some really wonderful feedback from our families last year about some of the things that we implemented and sort of the way that we're just kind of approaching their visiting our building and welcoming them in. So we'll continue that work. We are going to, with our students, continue as well, hoping that they feel respected and safe and work on those self-regulation skills. So with responsive classroom and second steps, we will continue to work for those student goals. Overall, I'm expecting to reduce our office discipline referrals, our chronic absenteeism, and of course, our suspensions. So from a climate standpoint, what are we going to do? This year, parents they asked a little bit more last year about getting some more information about what's happening in the curriculum. So this year we put in a Curriculum Corner newsletter, and this newsletter will go out monthly, and every special area has a block. So if it's computers, if it's library media, if it's intervention, EL bilingual, social work psychologist, and I put our coaches on there as well. And then the classroom teacher will be responsible for their newsletters to update teachers to update parents for the specific things that are happening in their classroom. Also, we're trying the implementation of ClassTag away from Class Dojo to see if ClassTag is a venue for parents to interact virtually with the teachers and post messages and reminders and things like that. So we're attempting that. This year for open house, we also developed a passport. It was a very different format than last year, and it was met with very rave reviews. It got our families around our building, and if you have visited Rock Hill at all, it is a very unique layout, and it's not conducive to one that feels warm and homey. So we have to make it warm and homey, and we have to get everyone around the building. So the passport was, with Evan's help actually, we did a video of myself that was the first part of the session for the families, and students were welcome to come. And that's another thing that we really want to open our doors. It's not just a parent event. We want families to feel like this is their second home. And so they walked around the building after they did their session with their classroom teacher, or two, depending on how many students. They walked around the building, going into nooks and crannies they had never been, meeting staff that they had never met, getting stamps. It was wonderful. It was a really wonderful opportunity, and after meeting with PTO and PTAC, they absolutely said we should keep that format because it was, they felt very accepted and met staff they didn't know existed. So it was great. Taking Mrs. Kylie's Family Connection Breakfast, we put that in place last year as well as another way to get families into our building. We're going to continue that this year. It's such an overwhelming response. Another way to get families and their children into our building, so we will continue that. We have created a math committee and a literacy committee, so we're going to work on a math STEM night, possibly even a second fluency night to get families in, because we had heard from Mrs. Valero that her fluency night was a big hit, so we want to make sure that we borrow all of those really awesome ideas that we hear from our colleagues. Our Spirit Day, one of the things I wanted just to let everybody know is how we're giving back to our community. We have Spirit Days monthly, and we adopt an organization for Wallingford, and students know ahead of time what their dollar will be going to. And then we have a couple of students with their families go over to that organization and donate that money that was raised. A nice way for our school to give back and understand that there's a larger world beyond 910 Old Rock Hill Road. We are also building our relationship for junior achievement with Amphenol, who's a local corporation, who will be coming in to do our Junior Achievement Day in the winter. And we have actually just built a relationship with the Wallingford Housing Authority, who wants to support our local school. We happen to be close to them, and so they are reaching out, trying to find ways to help support us, and they're going to do some support of an art club and some pieces of PE with Mrs. Wolin. So it was nice that they reached out and that we could build another bridge in the community. We have our library media specialist working on ways to bring our careers in the working world to our students. So we look forward to what magic she'll be able to weave with that. This year, we also have a theme with my own two hands, really trying to get the students and the staff to adopt an idea that it really just takes one comment of kindness, one action, just something, and it will have a ripple effect. So if we all do that one little thing with our own two hands, we can really make this world a better, a brighter, safer, kinder place. And there's actually a song that goes along with it. I have a bulletin board where students are taking their picture in front of it, and we're posting it. And it goes along, instead of my positive office referral this year, it is now a principal's high five, just to go along with the handprint. And we are counting our way to 350 acts of kindness with our handprints to also celebrate and weave in our Wallingford anniversary. And just a few of the other things that are happening. We have our staff, they get a weekly newsletter this year with all of the nuts and bolts that they need to kind of reduce the email clutter that they might get, and hopefully they'll be mindful of all of that information in a concise way. Our Sunshine Committee is going to work on putting in some staff morale boosting events to kind of boost our staff. Teaching is a very stressful job. They've got a lot on their plates, and we're trying to find opportunities to come together as a staff and really have fun. And we're going to put in some new clubs. We're going to have a typing club starting. We have an art club starting, and then we have Mr. Russell putting his mind to a sports club as well. So trying to bring kids to school before school or after school in different ways to get engaged in school beyond the learning that is happening. And then we're going to build in a recognition system for lunch of the week, bus of the week, and recess of the week to target those trouble areas with the unstructured time. And of course, just as a school team, we are going to meet and monitor our behavior data and our data teams and our SRBI teams, and just always look at our behavior and our academic data and be sure that we're all working in the right direction to grow our students. Yes.
Sorry, I was about to sneeze. Mrs. Purcell?
Yes.
No, actually, she answered my question.
Okay, Mr. Votto?
First of all, I thought you were gonna sing the song.
It's such a wonderful song. It really makes me tear up. It's so wonderful.
Okay. You mentioned about the school being warm and all that. I have to tell you, I was there last year for your,
Yes, and you're
Veterans
coming
Day.
again this year.
your school is warm. I commented to a number of people after I was there that day. It was just beautifully decorated. Everybody was very welcoming. The school just looked really, really nice. And I was on the renovation committee a long time ago, and I remember what that school looked like. And you don't go to the schools that often, but that day it was just amazing how nice everything was. Student work all over the place. It was very, very nice. So
Thank you.
you've accomplished that.
Thank you. I appreciate that feedback. Any other questions?
No questions.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
May I make a comment, just very quickly? I just want to thank the administrators for coming out tonight. Again, I think that it's another example, our second in a row, of staff that is truly committed to the students in Wallingford. And this is only a snapshot, as I know all of our board members know, but maybe people not at home know. This is a snapshot of what these individuals do on a daily basis with their staff, with their students, with their families. We heard from riding buses to doing so many things to increase culture and climate for students and families, to deeply knowing their data about literacy and numeracy. We are very fortunate to have you in our district, and I just want to say thank you. I know also the other part of this, that's not always easy. It's not always where you feel like you have everything put together, but you're a great team, and I think, as was mentioned, I think, Kristen, you mentioned the 5:30 phone calls, and I saw Lisa crack up because I know that that's going on. These two still do it, and they're in central office. So that 3-5 group always had a very interesting collaborative approach. Now I'm involved, and I'm not doing the 5:30 texts, but I'm also part of it. And then I feel guilty because I'm responding at closer to 6. But I just want to say thank you very, very, very much for everything you do, and we really enjoy working with you as a team. So thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Any other comments? Public comment? This meeting is adjourned.